Just a nurse. That is what Dr. Caldwell said 14 hours before the photograph appeared on every screen in Houston. Cedar Creek Medical's ICU hums with fluorescent lights and antiseptic smell, a sound so constant that most people stop hearing it within minutes. Laura Bennett stopped hearing it 20 years ago. She moves through her shift like water moving through a canal, purposeful, efficient, invisible. Her scrubs are standard issue. Her badge reads Hel Bennett, RN in small letters beneath the hospital logo. Nothing distinguishes her from the 34 other nurses rotating through the unit today, and that is precisely the way she has constructed her life. 2 decades at Cedar Creek. 0 complaints in her personnel file. 0 incident reports. 0 reasons for anyone in human resources to connect the name on her employment contract to the classified medical protocols she monitors, or to the pension contributions being funneled to an offshore account under authorization codes that do not officially exist. She wears a silver watch with Cyrillic markings etched into the back case. No one has ever asked about it. No one ever asks about anything when you are good at being invisible. The shift change happens at 0600. Laura arrives early, as always, 17 minutes before the official start time, when the night crew is still charting and the day crew is still in the parking lot. The ICU has 47 beds arranged in 2 curved banks, each isolated behind glass partitions that slide open with a pneumatic hiss. Ventilators wheeze their mechanical rhythms. Monitors click in steady patterns. The smell of bleach and something deeper, something like copper mixed with human suffering, sits under everything else. She checks her assignment on the whiteboard. 3 patients. Bed 14, a 68-year-old woman post-op from a triple bypass. Bed 19, a 43-year-old construction accident victim with crush injuries to both legs. And a new admission scheduled to arrive in the next hour from Bagram Airfield via emergency medical evacuation. No name listed yet. Just a brief note: Green Beret. GSW and shrapnel. Multiple lacerations. Field stabilized. Laura pulls up the incoming file on the computer at the nursing station. Standard protocol. She reviews the field reports from the Black Hawk medics, the surgical notes from the forward operating base, the transfer summary from the transport team. Her eyes move through the data methodically. Vital signs stable. No allergies documented. Medications listed. Then she scrolls down to the personal effects inventory and sees it. 1 pair of combat boots, tan leather, US military issue, heavily worn, laces replaced multiple times. The leather is cracked. The soles are uneven from miles of patrol across terrain that breaks equipment and men alike. There is a note in the system: patient's personal property. High value to patient. Handle with care. Her hand trembles for exactly 2 seconds before she steadies it by pressing her palm against the desk. The boots arrive before the patient does. The orderly carries them in a clear plastic bag with the patient's other belongings, and Laura takes them without comment, storing them in the secure locker beside bed 12, where the new admission will be assigned. She runs her index finger across the plastic. The leather underneath is still faintly warm from the transport aircraft. There is dried blood on the left boot's heel. Not the patient's blood, she determines instantly. Blood from another source, probably field transferred during stabilization. She knows the look of blood that has been in the sun too long, the particular rust-brown color of hemoglobin that has oxidized at altitude. The patient arrives at 0654. The gurney comes through the double doors pushed by 2 emergency medical technicians in flight suits with the 160th SAW Night Stalkers insignia on their shoulders. Behind them walks a doctor in a surgical cap, still holding a tablet with incoming vitals. The patient is a young man, early 20s, his right arm wrapped in compression bandaging, his left leg immobilized from hip to ankle. There are surgical dressings on his shoulder, his ribs, and along his left collarbone. His eyes are closed, his breathing assisted by a portable ventilator tube, his consciousness somewhere between the morphine they gave him in the Black Hawk and whatever dreams or nightmares live in the space where pain used to be. Laura begins the admitting process with practiced efficiency. She connects the portable monitor to the bedside equipment. Transfers the 4 lines. checks the dressing on his shoulder wound. And then she sees it. The jagged scar on his left shoulder blade, just visible at the edge of the surgical dressing. Thin white line of old sutures. Roughly a centimeter long. Slightly raised from the surrounding skin. The kind of scar that comes from field surgery performed without proper anesthesia in a village that had already lost too much. The kind of scar Laura Bennett created 20 years ago in Kandahar. She was 28 years old when she held the 8-year-old boy in the rubble of what used to be a marketplace. His village had been caught in crossfire between Taliban fighters and a U.S. Army convoy. The convoy's medic had been hit. The nearest hospital was 3 hours away through terrain controlled by hostile forces. She had been attached to the unit as a training advisor, one of the military's hidden operatives embedded in medical units around Kandahar province, monitoring combat casualties for a classified pharmaceutical study. She was never supposed to be in active treatment scenarios. She was never supposed to intervene. She had intervened anyway. The boy's arm was nearly severed. Shrapnel had torn through the deltoid muscle, nicked the axillary artery, and was still lodged against the scapula. Her hands had moved on their own. She had prepped a field surgical kit. She had sutured the artery with 7-0 nylon. She had flushed the wound with saline and repositioned the loose tissue and closed him up with 23 stitches while he screamed until his voice gave out. She had given him her combat boots to wear because his feet were bleeding and barefoot. She had told him to be brave, that his body would remember how to be strong even when his mind did not. She had never seen him again. Until now. Laura's jaw clamps shut. Her hands continue working, adjusting the forward drip rate, checking the catheter placement, documenting the new vitals in the system. Her face betrays nothing. No one at Cedar Creek Medical has ever seen her expression change, not in 2 decades of 12-hour shifts and emergency codes and patient deaths. She maintains what people call professional composure. What they do not understand is that she has decades of experience hiding. Military operational training teaches you to compartmentalize. Master Chief Petty Officer training teaches you to move through pain as if it were just another form of air. The young man's eyes flutter open briefly. For a moment his gaze focuses on nothing, lost in the space between consciousness and the medication in his bloodstream. Then his eyes move to the right and find Laura standing beside his bed, and something in his expression shifts, not recognition, exactly, but a kind of relief. The look of a person who has seen something terrible and is grateful to see someone who looks competent enough to have maybe survived something terrible too. Then the morphine pulls him back under. Laura finishes the initial assessment and documents her findings. She does not allow herself to look at the boots in the locker. Not yet. Not while anyone might be watching. She moves to her other 2 patients, checking their lines, adjusting their medications, performing the invisible work that keeps people alive and breathing and whole. 20 minutes pass. 30. The ICU's rhythm continues its familiar pattern, interrupted periodically by codes and alarms and the small emergencies that constitute the ordinary chaos of critical care. At 08:04, Dr. Marcus Caldwell arrives for his morning rounds. He is a man constructed from confidence and Italian leather shoes and the kind of bone structure that photographs well in hospital marketing materials. 52 years old. Divorced twice. Chief of surgery at Cedar Creek Medical for 15 of those years, a position he earned through a combination of surgical skill and the willingness to build relationships with board members at golf clubs where the membership cost more than most people's annual salaries. He carries his tablet like a general might carry a command staff, with the implicit understanding that he is accustomed to being obeyed. His shoes click against the tile floor in a rhythm that causes several nurses to straighten their posture, pulling their shoulders back as if responding to a siren that only executives can hear. Caldwell approaches bed 12, where Marcus Webb is still sedated. He reviews the chart on his tablet for approximately 90 seconds without speaking. Then he looks at the patient's shoulder wound, checks the drainage, and begins writing orders on the tablet with the stylus, his finger moving with practiced authority. 200 milligrams of amoxicillin every 6 hours, Caldwell says. His voice carries the kind of tone that expects no questions. Continue the current morphine protocol. Assess for infection markers every 4 hours. Labs in 12 hours. Laura, who is charting at the bedside, looks up from her documentation. She does not say, "Excuse me, doctor." She does not use a tentative tone. She simply speaks, her voice level and quiet and absolutely certain. The patient was field treated with 400 milligrams of cephalexin at FOB shank. Amoxicillin will create a type B interaction with the remaining drug levels in his system. Cardiac arrhythmia is probable within 6 hours. He needs a different class entirely. The room goes very quiet. The ventilator continues its mechanical wheeze. A monitor beeps steadily in the background. But the human voices have stopped. Caldwell's stylus freezes against the tablet. He turns his head slowly, studying Laura with an expression that suggests he has just noticed a speck of dust on his designer glasses. "Excuse me," he says. Cephalosporin interaction, Laura continues, her gaze steady and her hand still. Cross-reactivity at this dosing level. Given his baseline heart rate and the stress from surgery, we're looking at a window of maybe 4 to 6 hours before we see the dysrhythmia. Better to use doxycycline or flucloxacillin. Either will avoid the interaction. Dr. Caldwell closes his tablet. The gesture is slow and deliberate. He stands there for 10 full seconds without speaking, his eyes fixed on Laura with the kind of intensity that suggests he is trying to make a decision. Around them, the ICU continues its work. No one else is looking directly at them, but Laura is quite certain that everyone in the unit is listening. That, Caldwell finally says, is not your decision to make. No, Laura agrees. Her voice has not changed. It's yours. But he will arrest in 6 hours if you give that order. Caldwell studies her for another moment. Then he swipes his stylus across the tablet, deleting the previous medication order, and writes a new one. He does not acknowledge Laura. He does not make eye contact. He simply turns and walks away toward the next patient, his Italian shoes clicking against the tile in a rhythm that seems somehow slightly less confident than it was before. Laura returns to her documentation. Her hands are absolutely steady. Her heart rate, visible on her own pulse where she takes it against her neck, is normal. But something has shifted in the air of Cedar Creek Medical's ICU, some small realignment in the hierarchy of authority, and she is quite certain that Dr. Caldwell has felt it as clearly as she has. He does not approach her directly. Not yet. But when he finishes his rounds 47 minutes later, he stops at the nursing station and speaks to the charge nurse in a voice low enough that only 3 people can hear it. Laura is one of them. If that nurse continues to operate beyond her scope, Caldwell says, security will escort her out. Make sure she understands that. The charge nurse nods. She does not look directly at Laura. No one does. Laura continues charting her patient notes as if she has heard nothing. The scar on Marcus Webb's shoulder blade is still visible in her peripheral vision, a thin white line that carries 20 years of stories neither of them has told anyone. She thinks about the boots in the locker. She thinks about the 8-year-old boy who became the Green Beret in bed 12. She thinks about the invisible threads that connect combat zones and hospital corridors across decades and continents. She takes a sip of coffee. The cooling liquid is bitter. The morning is far from over. The conference room at Cedar Creek Medical fills with tiered seating, 30 residents and attending physicians arranged like an amphitheater, morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook the Houston skyline. It's 0800 hours. The cooling air tastes like recycled breath and anticipation. Laura stands at the front of the room. Caldwell enters last, coffee cup in hand, moving with the deliberate slowness of a man who owns the space. He doesn't greet her. He never does. His eyes are the color of a winter sky, cold, empty, utterly clear about his intentions. Nurse Bennett has provided us with an educational opportunity, he says, settling into his seat. The room quiets instantly. 30 physicians lean forward. Laura's jaw tightens, but only in the slightest degree. No one notices. She's learned to make her reaction smaller than a heartbeat. For 12 minutes, Caldwell dissects her decision to countermand his medication order. He projects her nursing notes on the screen, handwriting neat, dates precise, every decision documented with clinical clarity. He circles phrases in red marker. Unauthorized protocol deviation, he reads aloud, voice sharp as a surgical blade. Our overconfident friend believed her judgment superseded the attending physician's. Florence Nightingale with a hero complex, we might say. A few residents smile. The smile dies in their throats when they see Laura's face. She hasn't moved. Her hands are clasped behind her back at parade rest, a detail no one recognizes for what it is. Her body language belongs to military bearing, not hospital protocol. She stands like a soldier standing down, not like a nurse being corrected. Caldwell continues. Can anyone identify where Nurse Bennett exceeded her training? A resident raises a hand. Caldwell nods, permissive. The drug interaction protocol falls under pharmacy's purview, not nursing oversight. Caldwell smiles. Precisely. Nurse Bennett stepped beyond her scope. Again. He turns to her directly now, and his voice drops to a tone that somehow carries further than when he was projecting. If you continue to practice medicine without a license, we'll need security to escort you from the premises. I'm certain you understand hospital policy. It's not a threat. It's worse than a threat. It's institutional power wrapped in professional language, delivered in front of an audience, making any denial sound like insubordination. Laura's eyes don't change. Her breathing doesn't shift. She inclines her head, barely perceptible, and walks out at the same measured pace she entered, her shoes making no sound against the polished floor. The door closes with a soft click that echoes longer than it should. At the vending machines on the third floor, 20 minutes later, 3 interns perform a mock pantomime. They stand frozen mid-motion, faces locked in exaggerated seriousness, coins poised between their fingers and the payment slot. One of them drops a shoulder forward in what they think is her stance. Another presses his lips into a thin line. They're imitating her. Mocking the way she absorbed Caldwell's entire assault without flinching, without defending, without even blinking. The humor is the worst kind, the kind that comes from being certain your target won't fight back. Caldwell watches from 10 feet away, coffee cup raised to his lips, smirking. He's enjoying this. The smirk is the problem. It says he's already won. It says he knows something they don't. It says he's in control of the narrative, the room, the hierarchy, and he can afford to find amusement in a nurse's humiliation because nurses don't have the power to humiliate back. Laura approaches the vending machine. No hesitation. No acknowledgement of the interns, their gestures, their laughter. She inserts $3 in exact change, presses B7, and collects her black coffee when it drops with a mechanical thud. The smell of hot caffeine, bitter and acrid. She drinks it standing there, eyes forward, spine straight. The interns gradually fall silent, uncertain how to maintain mockery when the target isn't performing the shame they expected. She returns her cup to the recycling bin. Turns toward the ICU. Walks past them without looking. No reaction means no response. No response means no satisfaction. That's the mathematics of invisible resistance. By 1015 hours, Laura enters supply room 4. The door closes behind her with a magnetic hiss. The room is narrow, lined floor to ceiling with stacked linens, for supplies, bandages arranged by size and gauge. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead, that particular hospital sound, constant and somehow accusatory. No windows. No one ever comes here. She's counting on that. Her hands grip the metal shelf in front of her. Both palms, fingers spread wide. The shelf is cool, unyielding, and her knuckles press forward until they turn white, then bone white, the blood drained completely from the skin. Her head bows. Her breathing is measured, controlled, the kind of breathing she learned in tactical scenarios when panic could kill you faster than enemy fire. In through the nose. Hold for 4 counts. Out through the mouth. In through the nose. 90 seconds. Her shoulders stay level. Her jaw stays clenched. The tears don't come because tears are surrender, and Master Chief Petty Officer Laura Bennett doesn't surrender to anything, not to Caldwell, not to the hospital system, not to the indignity of being called out in front of 30 doctors for having the audacity to save a patient's life. But her hands, gripping that shelf, tell a different story. Her hands are trembling. Not with fear. With restraint. The trembling is effort, pure, focused effort to contain something that wants very much to emerge. 90 seconds pass. She releases the shelf. Flexes her fingers once, twice. The blood rushes back. She straightens. Her face recomposes itself in the time it takes to turn around. By the time she opens the door, the nurse everyone knew before entering this room has returned. Unbothered. Unshaken. Professional. She returns to Webb's bedside at 1018 hours. He's sleeping, his shoulder rising and falling under the cotton blanket, the four lines running clear, the cardiac monitor showing the steady green rhythm of his heart. She pulls a chair close and sits. Her coffee is still hot. She drinks it quietly, watching him, her mind compartmentalizing everything that happened in the conference room the way she learned to compartmentalize fear during field operations. The insults become data. The humiliation becomes information to be filed and processed later. Right now, there's only the patient. There's only the work. But that wasn't the worst part. By 0800, Cedar Creek's chief medical officer receives a call from Dr. Caldwell. 3 board members receive separate calls within the hour, each one describing a nurse performing invasive medical procedures without proper authorization. The language is professional, concerned, deeply troubled. By 1000 hours, the Texas Board of Nursing has received an anonymous complaint, specific case numbers cited, timestamps logged. Someone is documenting this. Someone is building a file. At 1100 hours, an external investigator from the hospital's malpractice insurance carrier confirms her arrival time, noon. She'll review every file, every chart note, every decision Laura made regarding Marcus Webb. She'll interview residents and nursing staff. She'll build a case. The machinery of institutional power has started moving, and Laura Bennett, Master Chief Petty Officer, Field Surgeon, the woman who saved 17 lives in Kandahar and 1,000 more since, has just been fed into it like paper into a shredder. Caldwell sits at his desk on the administrative floor, reviewing a file that contains her employment history. 3 years at Cedar Creek Medical. References spotless. Credentials perfect. But the years before that? Nothing. The file simply begins 3 years ago, as if Laura Bennett didn't exist before arriving at this hospital. He stares at the blank space where her prior employment should be. No one has a blank space like that unless someone is very deliberately keeping her invisible. He picks up his phone and makes one more call. His voice is quiet, almost conversational. I need to speak with security about a nurse in the ICU. Bennett. There may be safety concerns. No, nothing concrete yet. But I want eyes on her. Yes. Every shift. Starting tonight. The monitor alarm cut through the ICU darkness at 0300 like a siren in a concrete bunker. 3 short bleeps. Pause. 3 more. Laura's eyes snapped open from the chair beside Marcus Webb's bed before the first alert even registered in the nursing station. Her body was already moving, muscle memory from 12 conflict zones taking over before her conscious mind caught up. Distended neck veins. Muffled heart sounds on auscultation. Blood compressing his heart. Cardiac tamponade. For seconds from alarm to diagnosis. She was at his bedside in movements that looked calm but were moving at precisely 1.3 times normal speed. Webb's eyes were wide, confused, his breathing shallow and desperate. His O2 sat was dropping. 94, 92. 90, the ventilator wheezed its mechanical rhythm, fighting against fluid pressure in the pericardial sac. Laura's hands moved on their own, already reaching for the ultrasound machine as her voice cut through the darkness with the quiet authority of someone who had performed emergency procedures in desert caves and forward operating bases. "Get me the cart." "Now," she said to the night resident frozen in the doorway. It wasn't a request. It was a command spoken in a register he'd never heard from the soft-spoken nurse who'd stood silently while Dr. Caldwell eviscerated her at Grand Rounds just 16 hours earlier. The resident moved. Laura was already prepping the ultrasound, her fingers finding the transducer with the precision of hands that had held lives together in the pitch black of IED aftermath. She positioned it along Webb's left fifth intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. There it was. The echo showed the pericardial sac distended like a balloon, fluid compressing the right atrium, the septum bowing inward with each heartbeat. Tamponade. The heart was being strangled from the outside. She didn't wait for Caldwell. She grabbed the pericardiocentesis kit, 18-gauge needle, 6-inch length, the same equipment she'd used on a squad leader at Bagram whose shrapnel wound had ruptured his pericardium. The patient had lived. So would Webb. 115/60, Laura said, reading the BP cuff without looking up. Falling. She swabbed Webb's skin with betadine, the sharp antiseptic smell cutting through the recycled hospital air. Prep the ultrasound guide. I need real-time visualization. The resident's hands trembled as he positioned the probe. Laura's didn't. She moved like a surgeon who had trained for 16 years at the highest levels of military medicine, guided by nothing but the quiet certainty that comes from having already survived the unsurvivable. The needle advanced through skin, through subcutaneous tissue, through the fibrous pericardium. 3 inches deep. 4 inches. She felt the subtle give as the needle punctured into the fluid-filled space, that tiny moment of resistance giving way, like breaking the surface of black water. "We're in," she said. A 60-milliliter syringe connected to the needle hub. Laura's steady hand drew back, and dark blood filled the barrel. Not bright red. Not arterial. Hemorrhagic pericardial fluid, blood compressing his heart. She pulled back slowly, methodically. 30 milliliters. 40. 50. With each draw, the pressure released. The ECG monitor showed the change immediately. "Watch the complexes," Laura said to the resident, her voice unchanged, as if they weren't standing in the dark watching a man's heart literally restart. The ST segments began normalizing. The voltage increased. His blood pressure began climbing as the compression released. 95/65. 100/68. The oxygen saturation rose in response as cardiac output improved. 92, 95. 97, stable. It took 4 minutes total. From alarm to stabilization. From tamponade to sinus rhythm. Laura secured the needle with a small occlusive dressing and stepped back, the syringe of blood sitting on the bedside table like evidence of a crisis that no one else would ever fully understand. Webb's color was already improving, the grayish tint fading from his lips. His breathing eased. The ventilator was meeting him halfway now instead of fighting. She began documenting immediately, her charting precise and detailed. Time of procedure. Needle gauge. Site location. Volume removed. Findings. Tolerated well. Patient stable post-procedure. Her handwriting was the same as always, neither rushed nor careless. Just facts. Clinical accuracy. A record that would hold up under any scrutiny. Caldwell arrived at 0307, 7 minutes after the alarm, moving with the controlled speed of a man who expected to find a disaster in his ICU but discovered instead that a nurse had already managed the situation with textbook precision. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, reading the monitor, reading her face, reading the documented procedure in the electronic chart that was already finalized and locked. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed in a way that made the resident step backward. "You performed this without attending authorization," Caldwell said. It wasn't a question. "Cardiac tamponade," Laura replied, her voice the same steady register as before. Decompensating patient. Scope of emergency protocols. She didn't explain further. Didn't apologize. Didn't offer justification. She simply looked at him with the eyes of someone who had made life and death decisions in conditions that would have broken lesser people, and she did not flinch. Caldwell's face remained utterly controlled, but something shifted behind his eyes. This was different from the humiliation at Grand Rounds. This was something worse. A nurse had performed an emergency invasive procedure that he, the chief of surgery, the man with board connections and 15 years of institutional power, had not authorized. More than that, she'd done it correctly. She'd saved the patient. And now he would have to explain why he hadn't been present when his patient arrested, why a nurse had moved faster than he could, why the outcome was good only because she had refused to wait for his permission. The night resident was staring at Laura with something between terror and awe. She had moved through that crisis like water finding cracks, like someone who had existed in spaces where the normal rules of hierarchy and protocol simply didn't apply. Where you saved lives first and asked for permission later because permission might come too late. The patient is stable, Laura said. Vitals improving. O2 sat holding at 98%. I'll continue monitoring. She removed her gloves with a soft snap, the sound like a door closing. But that wasn't the worst part for Caldwell. What he didn't know, what couldn't possibly have penetrated his understanding yet, was that he had just witnessed the moment where his institutional strategy shifted from social humiliation to something far more dangerous. He had humiliated her publicly. He had threatened her employment. He had set in motion the machinery of her professional destruction. And she had responded by saving his patient better than he could have saved him himself. That morning at 0800, Caldwell's phone calls would begin again, but different this time. More urgent. More desperate. More weaponized. A nurse practicing medicine without supervision. Patient safety concerns. Scope violation. By 1000, the text would come through his secure messaging, external investigator confirmed, arriving 1200 hours. By 1400, the termination letter. Caldwell would ensure it happened fast, clean, before anyone could connect the dots between his humiliation and his retaliation. He would ensure she was gone before anyone could ask too many questions about why the nurse had outperformed him. But for now, at 0310 in the dark ICU, Caldwell simply turned and walked out without another word. His presence had become irrelevant. The patient was stable. The crisis was over. And the quiet nurse with steady hands had just proven something he hadn't seen coming, that the person he had been trying to destroy might have been the only thing keeping his entire world from collapsing. By 0800, Caldwell's phone was already in motion. 3 board members received calls before breakfast, each one carefully worded, each one dripping with institutional concern. A nurse practicing medicine without supervision, he told them, his voice measured and grave. Countermanding physician orders. Performing procedures outside her scope of practice. We need to protect the hospital's liability. The board members, who knew Caldwell as a surgeon with impeccable credentials and political connections, listened. They nodded into their phones. They made notes. They promised to escalate. By 0830, Caldwell had filed a formal complaint with the Texas Board of Nursing. The complaint wasn't vague, it was surgical. Case numbers. Specific dates. The pericardiocentesis procedure at 0300, documented with her initials on the chart. Pattern of insubordination, he wrote. Dangerous deviation from established protocols. Potential patient harm. The anonymous submission portal accepted his complaint and assigned it a case file number before his coffee had gone cold. By 0900, an external investigator from the hospital's insurance carrier had received a faxed request from Cedar Creek Medical's risk management office. The investigator's name was Patricia Graves. She worked out of a corporate office in Dallas, specialized in employee misconduct reviews, and had never failed to find wrongdoing when the administration was sufficiently motivated to report it. Her calendar now showed an appointment for 1200 hours at Cedar Creek Medical. Full employment history review, the request memo stated. Potential credential fraud. Scope violations in critical care setting. Ms. Graves booked a hotel room near the airport. Laura didn't know any of this yet. She was in Webb's room at 0930, checking his vitals, listening to his lungs clear, watching the cardiac monitor trace its perfect rhythm across the screen. Sinus rhythm. Normal sinus rhythm. The kind of rhythm that said a person was going to live. Webb's eyes tracked hers as she moved through the room. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For last night." "Doing my job," she replied, and the words came out flat, automatic. She didn't know they were going to be the last words she'd speak in this hospital as a nurse. By 10:30, the chief medical officer, Dr. Marcus Sterling, who played golf with Caldwell on Saturday mornings at the River Oaks Club, had received a phone call about serious concerns regarding nursing staff misconduct. Sterling was a careful man, the kind who understood that protecting the institution meant protecting the people who kept the institution running. Which meant protecting Caldwell. A 10-minute conversation was enough. An email was drafted. A termination letter was prepared. The hospital's legal team reviewed it by 1100 and signed off. At 1400 hours, a manila envelope arrived at the nursing station. Laura's name was written on it in black ink. Her hands didn't shake as she opened it. The letterhead was Cedar Creek Medical. The signature was Marcus Sterling's. The words were clinical, precise, and absolute, pattern of insubordination and scope violations. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Please return all hospital credentials and access badges to Human Resources. Security will escort you from the premises. She read it twice. The first time, the words didn't seem to connect to anything real. The second time, something inside her shifted, like a door closing, like a chapter ending, like an identity she'd built stitch by stitch over 3 years was dissolving into water. The classified mission, Webb's integration into civilian medical systems, the 3-year surveillance of his exposure to the experimental combat drug, the whole reason she'd buried herself in this hospital under a false name and falsified credentials, it all crumbled with those 12 words. They were wrong. Not about her violations. About everything else. She didn't go to Human Resources immediately. She couldn't. Instead, she walked to the staff locker room, changed out of her scrubs, and placed each uniform carefully into a canvas bag. 6 pairs. 3 years of shifts folded into navy blue rectangles. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was measured. The composure that had carried her through grand rounds, through interns' mockery, through a cardiac emergency at 0300, held firm through this as well. She was good at disappearing. She'd done it before. She'd do it again. That evening at 18:30, she returned to Cedar Creek Medical through the staff entrance on the east side of the building. The security guard, Morrison, nodded at her. He didn't know yet. Nobody knew yet. The hospital was still operating on its normal rhythm, shift changes, code blues, routine rounds, the machinery of healing grinding forward. The laundry room was empty. Industrial washers stood silent like sleeping giants. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that particular hospital brightness that made the world feel sterile and false. Laura placed her canvas bag on the counter and withdrew the scrubs one by one. The first pair from 18 months ago, still holding the shape of her shoulders. The second pair from a night shift in the ICU, a patient who'd coded and come back. The third pair from the day Webb arrived. The fourth. The fifth. The sixth. She set them on the counter in chronological order, a timeline of her own erasure. Her fingers lingered on the final set, the one from this morning's shift. The fabric was still slightly damp from its last washing. She could smell the hospital detergent, a clean, chemical scent that meant sterility and safety and things you could trust. She pressed her palm against the collar and allowed herself 5 seconds of stillness. Not grief. Not anger. Something colder than either. Acknowledgement. This was the end of one story and the beginning of something else. She turned toward the exit without waiting for acknowledgement. The laundry attendant hadn't arrived yet. The scrubs remained on the counter, unclaimed, waiting for a person named Laura Bennett who would never come back. The lobby television was broadcasting the evening news when she passed at 1847. The anchor's voice was bright, almost cheerful, discussing municipal water quality and traffic incidents on the 610 loop. Laura had made it halfway to the southwest exit when the photograph appeared on the screen. Her photograph. Not her nursing ID photo. Her military portrait from a classified file that should have stayed classified. The kind of photo that meant someone with serious credentials had broken something open. The headline crawled across the bottom of the screen, "Decorated Combat Medic Missing After Controversial Firing." The lobby, which had been moving at normal rhythm, began to shift. A nurse noticed the photo and looked around. A security guard approached the television. Someone pulled out a phone. The volume of whispers increased, a pressure change like the approach of a storm. Laura calculated exit vectors. 3 possible routes. The southwest door was closest. The north stairwell offered cover but took longer. The main entrance was blocked. She chose southwest and moved with the smooth precision of someone who had navigated hostile territory with worse odds. She had made it for steps before Webb's voice cut through the rising chaos like a blade. Phantom. The room went dead silent. The lobby television was broadcasting the evening news when Laura walked past, and she barely registered the headline until her own photograph filled the screen above the words "Decorated Combat Medic Missing After Controversial Firing." A veteran reporter had connected dots that should have stayed separate: a name, a declassified Medal of Honor recommendation from Bagram, a 20-year-old field surgery documented in classified military records that had finally been released under the FOIA request of someone who remembered. The image on screen showed her in tactical gear from a 2003 photograph, callsign Phantom stenciled beneath her name in white letters. Her face was unmoved, jaw set like granite, eyes that had seen things no civilian should ever witness. Below the photo crawled the details: 18 years of covert operations, 7 Combat Valor Awards, 43 lives saved under fire. The anchor's voice said her name with something like reverence. Master Chief Petty Officer Laura Bennett, terminated from Cedar Creek Medical earlier today, has been identified as one of the most decorated special operations medical personnel in modern military history. The reason for her firing remains unclear, but sources indicate institutional conflict and documented protocol violations brought by Chief of Surgery Dr. Edward Caldwell. The lobby filled in 30 seconds. Phones emerged like weapons. Cameras turned toward her. A woman in a red blazer, news reporter, clearly, pushed through the double doors with a microphone extended. "Are you Laura Bennett? Did you serve at Bagram? Is it true you were fired for insubordination?" The questions came at her in overlapping waves, voices rising, the volume inside Cedar Creek Medical's lobby climbing like a helicopter rotor reaching full RPM. Laura stood motionless near the television, her discharged hospital badge still in her pocket, her folded scrub still in the canvas bag at her side. She didn't speak. She didn't move. The reporter got closer, microphone extended, but Laura's eyes were elsewhere, fixed on something beyond the chaos, the way someone looks when they're calculating wind speed and distance, when they're running trajectories in their mind. A security guard stepped forward, but not to escort anyone out. It was Morrison, the Marine veteran who'd worked Cedar Creek's night shift for 6 years, the one who'd nodded at her in passing but never asked questions. He moved between Laura and the cameras, his presence like a wall of quiet certainty. Then Marcus Webb appeared in a wheelchair pushed by his brother. He was still in a hospital gown, his shoulder wrapped in fresh gauze, but his eyes were clear and alive and locked directly on Laura's face. His voice cut through the noise like a blade through silk. "Phantom. 2 syllables. A call sign. An invocation." The room's volume dropped like someone had turned a dial. Webb's brother rolled him closer, and Webb's trembling, his hand shaking against the wheelchair arm, wasn't weakness. It was recognition. It was the tremor of a child who'd held a medic's hand in darkness and spent 20 years becoming someone worthy of that moment. "Phantom," he said again, and this time his voice carried the full weight of what those 8 years in his own life had meant. The lobby fell completely silent. Even the reporters lowered their microphones. Something had shifted. Something in the air pressure changed. Morrison stepped forward and spoke quietly, his words barely above a murmur, but they traveled across the marble lobby like a command issued in a combat zone. Master Chief Petty Officer on deck. His right hand moved to his chest in salute. One person. Then another. Then another. The security guards, 3 of them, stood at attention. The nurse who'd been working triage at the desk rose from her chair. The hospital volunteer, the custodian pushing a mop, the patient's family waiting in the corner, they all moved the same way. 36 people snapped to attention in the lobby of Cedar Creek Medical, their bodies aligned to an authority that had nothing to do with job titles or hierarchy and everything to do with something older, something true. A Marine general in dress blues strode through the main entrance flanked by 2 officers, his uniform decorated with ribbons that stretched from his shoulder to his belt. He moved like a man who had spent 40 years in service, whose presence made the fluorescent lights seem dimmer by comparison. His boots struck the tile floor in a rhythm like a metronome, precise and measured. He held a folder, official, sealed, and when he began to read, his voice carried the weight of the United States military establishment behind every word. The Navy Cross is awarded for extraordinary heroism in combat to Master Chief Petty Officer Laura Bennett for actions during 18 years of classified special operations across 7 theaters of war, the general said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Bronze Star. Silver Star. 2 Purple Hearts. Navy Commendation Medal for Valor. Each medal became its own sentence, each one landing like a stone dropped into still water. Caldwell emerged from the administrative corridor in his expensive suit, his Italian shoes clicking against the floor, and his face drained of color. His mouth opened. Closed. His hand reached for his phone, but it was already too late. The general continued reading. 43 lives saved under direct fire. 7 Combat Valor Awards. And a field operation in Kandahar, Afghanistan, in 2003, where Master Chief Petty Officer Bennett performed emergency field surgery on an 8-year-old boy caught in crossfire, using combat medical supplies and willpower to hold that child together while awaiting evacuation. The general's eyes moved to Webb. That boy, he said. Marcus Webb sat in that wheelchair with tears running down his face, not attempting to hide them, not attempting to maintain military composure, just letting them fall while his brother gripped the back of his chair and also stood at attention. The general continued. Master Chief Petty Officer Bennett did not receive recognition for that action because the operation was classified, because the child was a civilian national, because the rules of engagement and the politics of that moment required her service to remain invisible. But we remember. The Department of Defense remembers. Webb stood from his wheelchair, his first time on his feet in 3 days, his medical team watching with held breath, and his legs held. His brother stepped back, giving him space. Webb's hand went to the bag on the wheelchair seat and emerged holding a pair of boots. They were old. The leather was weathered, creased from 2 decades of wear, the soles worn thin. The stitching was unraveling in places. They smelled of dust and time and a version of memory that couldn't be washed out. She gave a terrified kid her shoes and a reason to live, Webb said, his voice steady now, his military bearing settling over him like armor. I spent 20 years in the Green Berets becoming someone worthy of that gift. Someone worthy of the sacrifice a Master Chief Petty Officer made for a stranger's child in a war zone. He held the boots up. These are the boots she pulled off her own feet. I've carried them with me through 3 tours. I wore them to my wedding. I wore them the day my first daughter was born. Webb's eyes met Laura's directly, and in that contact was a lifetime of gratitude too enormous for words. She gave me more than shoes. She gave me proof that some people, when everything else fails, when the world is breaking, they still choose to help. They still choose to be human. The room went so quiet you could hear the ventilator wheeze from the ICU 3 floors above. No one moved. No one breathed. And then Caldwell's phone rang. He pulled it from his jacket pocket with shaking fingers and answered. His face went from pale to ash. He listened for 12 seconds and then lowered the phone. The chief medical officer emerged from the administrative offices flanked by 2 hospital board members, and without ceremony, without spectacle, one of them addressed the lobby. Dr. Edward Caldwell's consulting credentials are terminated effective immediately. His employment with Cedar Creek Medical is terminated effective immediately. An internal review of his supervision of care protocols has identified a pattern of interference with veteran care integration. The voice was clinical, precise, the tone of institutional authority shifting its weight. We have determined that his complaint against Master Chief Petty Officer Bennett was initiated without merit and was part of a retaliatory action against an employee who made independent medical decisions in the best interest of a patient. Caldwell's mouth opened to respond, but security, the actual security team, not Morrison, approached him with his badge access revoked and his desk box already prepared. The fluorescent lights above his head hummed with a sound like machinery winding down, and he was walked out through the same lobby doors he'd orchestrated Laura's humiliation in, past the same vending machines where interns had mocked her stoic response to their cruelty. His Italian shoes clicked against the tile one final time before the glass doors closed behind him. The news ran footage that night of Dr. Caldwell leaving Cedar Creek Medical carrying a cardboard box. His face was set, his jaw clenched, his eyes looking at something nobody else could see. The reporter's voiceover explained the federal investigation into his conduct, the subpoenaed emails showing coordination with board members, the recorded phone calls made in violation of hospital policy. Within 48 hours, his consulting contracts with 7 other institutions were terminated. His testimony about Laura's dangerous protocols became evidence in a broader federal review of veteran care obstruction that expanded to 12 other facilities in the Texas medical system. The empire he'd constructed through 15 years of board connections and rigid hierarchy crumbled like architecture built on sand. 6 months later, a follow-up news segment showed him in a strip mall office park in suburban Houston, selling supplemental insurance policies from a folding table beneath fluorescent lights that flickered like dying moths. His LinkedIn profile no longer listed the chief of surgery title. His name appeared on no hospital letterhead. The man who'd positioned himself as the apex of institutional authority had become invisible, the same way he'd tried to make Laura invisible. The difference was that his invisibility was a punishment, and hers had been a choice. 72 hours after the lobby confrontation, Laura Bennett stood at the White House in full dress uniform, the blue fabric pressed sharp enough to cut, her Master Chief Petty Officer insignia gleaming beneath the ceremonial lights. The Navy Cross hung around her neck, the ribbon resting against her collarbone, the weight of it something she would carry for the rest of her life. The ceremony room held 200 people, military leadership, congressional representatives, the families of soldiers she'd saved across 18 years of operations now declassified, finally able to speak her name without redaction. Webb stood at attention behind her in his green beret dress uniform, and on his feet were the worn combat boots she'd given him as a barefoot child in Kandahar, finally returned to complete the circle that had taken 2 decades to close. When the ceremony concluded, when the applause finally faded, Laura allowed herself a moment of reaction. Her jaw unclenched by a fraction of an inch. Her shoulders dropped one measured breath. She met Webb's eyes and gave the slightest nod, the kind of acknowledgement that soldiers exchange when everything has been said and nothing more needs to be added. The ones who have seen the worst often give the most. That sentence became the headline for every news outlet, the tagline for every story, the thing people would remember when they thought of Master Chief Petty Officer Laura Bennett. Not the firing. Not the humiliation. Not the institutional cruelty. The sentence. The truth. The simple statement of what it meant to survive and choose service anyway. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your true value, subscribe to see more accounts of hidden heroism, institutional accountability, and the quiet warriors among us. Like this video. Comment with your own stories of being underestimated and proven right. The people who survived the hardest things deserve to be seen.